Back again. If you go play back my last video, you'll see that the volume started glitching. It was going crazy. I was like, what the fuck? I turned off the whole phone. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? I turned off the whole phone. I said, fuck this shit. It's right at the end of the video, the volume started going crazy. I said, oh, hell no. I said, somebody's trying to hack my phone. Let me get the fuck out of here. But we back. I reset everything. Hopefully it works now. Hopefully. So, I'm still trying to roll up here in case you don't know. Because that shit threw me off. It stopped everything. Let me plug in the headphones again. That shit was funny. I was like, yo. I was like, what the fuck is going on? And I didn't even get to finish watching that video. Okay. Now we're gonna go back and try to find that wasn't even the video I was looking for. That was a video about Donkey Kong Land. We was looking for a video on Donkey Kong Country. Yo, what's up with this shit? But yeah, we was looking for a video about Donkey Kong Country and the music. DK's Forgotten Platform. Whatever, apparently we're not gonna find a video about the music. Because apparently nobody cared. So that means that it probably is let me see, let me try this one. Blah, blah, blah. Fucking intros, man.
So, let's waste no more time and just jump right in. Whenever people talk about the greatest of classic platformers from the 80s and 90s, we hear a lot about titles like Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles. These games often make it onto the top 10 lists of their respective consoles. If you've seen my reviews, then you'll know that I happen to enjoy all of those quite a bit, though I do still maintain that the Genesis version of Sonic 2 can be unnecessarily frustrating for first-time players. While those games are certainly great on their own terms, I've always found it disappointing that the Donkey Kong Country series hasn't gotten quite the same attention. Sure, the series has always had its fans, but more recently it seems that parts of the gaming community, and especially newcomers, have been somewhat critical of these titles. People only like them for the graphics, they say. The games have too much trial and error, they say. The gameplay isn't all that interesting, they say. While I can see why new players may make these claims and will respect them for making them, I don't think enough credit is being given here. The Donkey Kong Country trilogy is more than shallow pre-rendered graphics and front.
Or maybe it's that America is fucking racist and they don't want to play with monkeys. Maybe.
demonstrating trial and error difficulty. I think that if one were to give these games a proper chance, they'd find that they deserve to rank up with the Marios and Sonics of their time. They're fast-paced, well-designed, reasonably challenging, and just all-around fun and enjoyable games. I'd even go as far to argue that one of them is the best classic side-scrolling game I've ever played. Yeah, you heard me. I know that's pretty high praise, and coming from someone who didn't even experience the Donkey Kong Country trilogy during its original run in the mid-90s. Like perhaps many others of my generation, I experienced them first through their GBA remakes, and wasn't exposed to the SNES originals until they came out in the Wii Virtual Console. Both fans and non-fans of the series alike have seemed to poo-poo the GBA remakes as second-tier versions that are quite clearly inferior. Just like how the Mario fanbase has seemed to ignore the advanced remakes, the DKC remakes for GBA have been similarly spurned simply for their being remakes. I won't try to deny that my exposure to these versions in my formative years of gaming hasn't affected my views of them. Even I can succumb to the subtle and wraith-like pressures of nostalgia. Still, I consider this to be yet another case where the remake reactionaries have not given credit where credit is due. While the GBA remakes might be inferior to the SNES originals in some aspects, I'd argue that they also surpass them in others. That's why, as with previous ROR installments, I wish to give both versions an in-depth review to see how the remakes attempt to recreate, build upon, and possibly even surpass the originals. We're going to be looking at each installment in the original trilogy, and their remakes for BBC and GBA.
Stop this guy right here. Listen, the original, the graphics are way better and faster, but that's because it's on the Super Nintendo, right? I'm already noticing that the Game Boy Advance version is actually slower. Like, everything is slower. All the animals are moving slower. The bad guys are moving slower. Even your character is moving slower. Dixie Kong, her helicopter is slower. I can notice that as I'm playing the game. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Because the problem is that the Game Boy Advance doesn't have, I guess, the computer board to keep up with the fast pace of the Super Nintendo, right? So that's why it's slower, but it's okay. It's still, as long as they, and I've been noticing a couple of other things when they shoot you out the barrels in those certain levels, you can't even catch up to the next barrel where you're supposed to land because the physics and the graphics are messed up or something. I don't know what the fuck is going on there. And then the music is just like horrible. That's why I started looking for a video to explain this shit right now. But of course, in my last video, the whole thing started glitching, so I had to turn everything off. But here we are now. But what you expect? It went from a Super Nintendo to Game Boy Advance. I'm not complaining, but those are the limitations of the Game Boy Advance. That's why the game is moving so slower, you know. So you could complain, but so much, you know. Go buy the Super Nintendo version, but then it doesn't have the new content. So that's why we playing the Game Boy version. But anyway,
I'll also be dedicating a single video to the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, along with a short ROR of DKC 1 and Game Boy Color. If you were expecting a Donkey Kong Country Returns ROR, I'm sorry, but I don't have a 3DS capture, so I have no way to record for it. For this marathon, we're sticking to the rare stuff. This is Donkey Kong Country, Remake, or Re-Break. Our story begins in 1981. A Nintendo artist named Shigeru Miyamoto was charged with taking existing arcade hardware and designing a new game for penetrating the North American arcade scene. The result was Donkey Kong, a puzzle platformer which saw protagonist Jumpman making his way through a construction site and other settings to rescue his girlfriend Pauline.
Listen, my first experience with a video game, it had to be Sonic and Mario. And if Mario came from Donkey Kong Jr. versus Mario, then that means Donkey Kong been there since the beginning as well. So I don't know why they shunned him, why they shunned the franchise.
Escaped Zoo 8. the game was enormously successful and spawned 2 arcade sequels, Donkey Kong Jr. in 1982 and Donkey Kong 3 in 1983. Both Donkey Kong and Jumpman, who was later renamed Mario, would go on to become 2 of the most iconic characters in Nintendo's lineup. After the early 80s, the Donkey Kong franchise would fall in popularity as new and even more popular Nintendo franchises like Super Mario and The Legend of Zelda made their mark in the growing home console market. The classic Donkey Kong gameplay formula would see its last iteration on the Nintendo Game Boy in 1994, which finally introduced DK's characteristic red tie. The gameplay of Donkey Kong 94 would be reincarnated 10 years later in the puzzle platformer Mario vs. Donkey Kong series. Besides the Game Boy remake, the Donkey Kong franchise had largely fallen from popularity by the early to mid-90s. Meanwhile, in merry old England, British developer Rare was doing pretty well from titles in its NES portfolio, that being such titles as Wizards and Warriors, Snake Rattle and Roll, RC Pro-Am, and of course, Battletoads. Using their profits, the firm purchased a number of fancy SGI computers, the same technology behind the digital effects in Jurassic Park. Around the same time, Nintendo visited Rare and was so enchanted by their development chops that they purchased a plurality of the company's stock, turning Rare into a second-party Nintendo developer. Rare was then commissioned to make a new title for the Super Nintendo using their SGI technology, and eventually the green light was given to develop a game based on the Donkey Kong IP. True to their greatest successes in the past, Rare's new Donkey Kong project took the form of a 2D platforming game, using SGI to model the characters in 3D, and then rendering them into sprites usable by the SNES. This advanced computer modeling process allowed the new title to offer visuals that were revolutionary for their time. To complete their reboot, the artists at Rare decided to abandon Donkey Kong's classic arcade look in favor of the new swirly-haired redesign we know today. Rare also redesigned Donkey Kong Jr., but when the producers at Nintendo complained that he looked too different, the redesigned Jr. was renamed Diddy Kong after a British slang word for small. The project, titled Donkey Kong Country, was finally released in November of 1994 after an intense marketing campaign by Nintendo, and went on to become one of the highest-selling and highest-rated games on the system. The game was such a hit that it spawned 2 direct sequels, 3 spin-offs on the Game Boy, a racing game, and a collectathon platformer for the Nintendo 64. Considering how gamers usually hate reboots, that's pretty impressive. While recently the original trilogy saw a digital re-release on the Wii U, along with the Donkey Kong Land trilogy on the 3DS. At the heart of this lasting legacy is the reboot that started it all, Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. How well does DKC1 hold up, and how does the Game Boy Advance remake stack up in comparison? As with most classic platformers, the plot isn't groundbreaking by any means, but it's still worth bringing up in this review. In the SNES version, the only sort of story exposition you get is Donkey Kong hanging his head in shame after discovering his missing banana hoard. The GBA remake adds a short intro cutscene that gives a more detailed helping of exposition than the SNES original. Our tale takes place on the conveniently named and shaped Donkey Kong Island, where the titular mountain gorilla and his relatives live in peace with the island's other inhabitants. Donkey Kong, who is actually the grandson of the original arcade Donkey Kong, has amassed a gigantic banana hoard under his house by unknown means. One night, Donkey Kong asks his cousin, a New World monkey named Diddy Kong, to stand guard over his banana hoard as part of his video game hero training. Only shortly after assuming his post, Diddy is attacked by a group of invading crocodiles known as the Kremling Crew, a nefarious cohort of cutthroats led by the kooky King K. Rool. The lizards shove Diddy into a barrel and chuck him in the bushes, and then proceed to rob DK's entire banana hoard. Donkey Kong is woken the next morning by his grandfather, Cranky Kong, who claims to be the Donkey Kong from the arcade original. When informed that his hoard has been pilfered, an enraged Donkey Kong promises to beat every single banana out of the Kremlings and send the scaly crusaders back from whence they came. Like I said, the plot's nothing too terribly special, but I can at least give it credit for keeping things lighthearted and fun. I couldn't possibly write a DKC review without mentioning dem aesthetics. In terms of graphics and presentation, I honestly think this game still looks fabulous even by today's standards. The character models may look dated when viewed up close, but when pre-rendered into sprites, they still look amazing. The character sprites are nicely detailed, brightly colored, well shaded, and brilliantly animated. The overall art direction manages to look somewhat realistic, while still being cartoony enough to avoid dim Uncanny Valley feels. The game is also quite charming. I love how all the enemies have goofy and over-the-top animations. I love how DK and Diddy do a little dance whenever you finish a stage. I love how whenever you damage Master Neki, the tops of his eyelids somehow detach from his head in a comedic fashion. I love how whenever you lose a bonus stage, Diddy throws his hat on the ground and starts jumping on it in frustration. Despite its realistic look, the game knows full well that you're playing as a gorilla and a monkey trying to retrieve bananas from a bunch of lizards. The environments make good use of parallax scrolling in back and front layers, and occasionally feature some awesome weather effects. Ropey Rampage, for example, has a stormy rain effect with lightning flashing in the background, while the Orangutan Gang features a swoony sunset look. Some stages, like Coral Capers, bust out some kick-ass Mode 7 effects. Overall, by any measure of graphical quality, the visuals in the original SNES version of Donkey Kong Country have aged very well and remain impressive even to this day. But how about the GBA version? A lot of fans and reviewers have often described the portable remakes as graphically inferior, and I can see why. But as I said in the
That's me right there, that's me.
Mario RWARs, I think that a lot of people have forgotten that the GBA screen was only 240 by 160p, and that it wasn't backlit. When viewed on an actual GBA screen, particularly a GBA SP, all of these games still look really nice. When viewed off of a Game Boy player, which is the only means I have of recording these games, the graphics look blurrier and oversaturated due to lackluster scaling and TV backlighting. What I'm getting at here is that while SNES games remade on the GBA may or may not look as good as their Super Nintendo brethren, it's worth remembering that the games look the way they do because developers had to get around screen size and lighting constraints. That all being said, how does the GBA DKC compare to the SNES original? I would say that the SNES version is the better looking of the two. The GBA version sports oversaturated coloring and lacks the detail of its home console cousin. While all of the graphical effects from the original are present and accounted for, they don't look
Part 3 looks pretty good. We playing that right now.
Quite as impressive. When viewed by the system's own standards, however, I'd consider the GBA Donkey Kong Country to be one of the best looking games on the system. The sprite work still looks really nice, and the environments are still good on the eyes. While the special effects may not look as good as before, it's still impressive and commendable that the wizards at Rare were able to pull off these console quality effects on a portable system. The SNES version is still the better looking game at the end of the day, but considering all the GBA's technical limitations, I still consider the two versions to be at least comparable. What about the soundtrack? I'd say that Donkey Kong Country and SNES sounds just as good as it looks. Taking the musical chairs are a trio of well-known Rareware musicians. Evelyn Fisher-Novakovic, yes she did get married, Robin Beanland of Conker's Bad Fur Day fame, and the illustrious David Wise, my favorite video game composer. DKC has received a lot of acclaim for its music, and while it's not my personal favorite soundtrack in the series, it's certainly a great assortment of tunes in its own right. The instrument quality is top-notch for a Super Nintendo game, the tunes themselves are catchy and upbeat, and each track offers ambience to draw the player into the environment. Every gamer worth their salt can hum DK Island Swing, the track that plays in levels like Jungle Hijinks. How about the fantastic title theme, which is a remix of the song from the original arcade game? How about the playful silliness of Bonus Room Blitz? How about the subtle atmosphere of aquatic ambience? How about the catchy beat of Fear Factory? My absolute favorite track though has to be Life in the Mines. The slamming pickaxes in the background double as ambience and percussion, and the over-the-top winds are not only very catchy, they're also emotionally moving in a strange kind of way. Beyond the AAA tracks in DKC, there are also a handful that are just good but not great. I've never personally been a fan of Voices of the Temple. The melody seems to have been overshadowed by the ambience. I could say the same thing about Northern Hemispheres and Misty Menace. Tracks like Treetop Bop and Minecart Madness are pretty catchy, but somewhat lacking in ambience. Generally though, the SNES soundtrack gets a gold star from me. So how does the GBA version compare? Like with its graphical capabilities, I think that the Game Boy Advance has been unfairly shat upon when it comes to music. I'll say right now that when it comes to sound, the Super Nintendo is one of my absolute favorite systems. And while I do think that the Game Boy Advance sounds inferior in comparison, I also think that writing it off as crap isn't being fair. I've often heard the GBA version of the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack described as quote-unquote butchered in comparison to the original rendition. I'll accept that many people prefer the SNES version of the soundtrack, and that's perfectly fine, but butchered? Really? Once again, I feel like what people mean when they say that is, it doesn't sound exactly like the original, so therefore it's bad. As in the Mario RWARs, I must stress that the GBA's hardware is different from the Super Nintendo's. Expecting all the tracks to sound exactly the same is unrealistic. I prefer to think of them as remixes, like when someone takes a Super Nintendo song and turns it into a Sega Genesis song. Part of the fun for me is seeing how the composers will take a great track like DK Island Swing and turn it into something new using different hardware. And in general, I think that the GBA version is one of the best sounding games on the system. Hell, I'll even say that I actually prefer some of the tracks in this remake over the SNES versions. The DKC title theme has never sounded better than it does here, especially with the badass intro cutscene playing in the back.
This guy's talking too much shit, man. Let's go into it. this is that level that I spoke about a couple of videos ago, that I said I would need a code for it because those stupid bugs are gonna keep killing me, and we're not gonna be able to finish this level. The same problem happened in Super Nintendo, so hold on, I gotta turn this way. But yeah, those bugs are super annoying. I don't know. It's like you can't get away from them. They attack when you jumping, and they attack when you're in the water. Well, actually, I think the water is the only safe place because it's a bug. Hold on, what the fuck am I looking for? Gameboy Advance. Alright. And then Donkey Kong. Damn, we got to this level pretty fast. I never, or maybe, I don't know. Right, boom. Okay, so we need like an invincibility code or some shit. Always have partner. Maybe we could do that one. No, because that one keeps messing up the game and freezing it. So let's do invincibility. The barrel, right? There it is. Let me see. Hold on, let's keep that open for now. Just in case. What the hell, man? Alright, it's on. It did not work. It did not work. Okay. Don't work. So let's try or maybe it does work and I gotta restart the hold on. Maybe that's the problem. Because that's what happened the last time. Hold up. Boom, boom. Barrel. See, I hope this works. freaking terrible. need that code, man. And none of these shits are working. There's not even one in there. Man. Max Bananas. Quick. Oh my god, that's the last of the list. Don't know what to do here. Let's try where is it? Always partnered, right? Always have partner. Where is that one at? Always, okay, here we go. Always have partner. Let's try that, man. Ain't nothing else working, right? Ain't nothing else working. Fucking buttons disappeared here. What the hell? Everything is fucking up over here. Hold on, man. What the fuck, man? What the fuck? Control layout. Okay, yeah, exactly how I thought it was supposed to be. Alright, what's the other shit? Cheats. This barrel shit don't work, so let's get that one out of here. Post that. Oh shit. Supposed to be like that. Delete that. Boom. Okay, boom, boom. What's this? A partner. What the fuck? Goodness. The game crashed. The game crashed. That's what just happened. The freaking game crashed. Here again. Oh my goodness. Load. Let's try load. bunch of new stuff to this game. Oh, did he kick me out? What happened? What? I thought we was gonna play. Oh. Oh, nah, I didn't do all that. So, I guess we gotta find Wrinkly before we could talk to that guy. Okay, so clearly they added a bunch of brand new stuff to this one. Oh, that's it. I can't go no more. So we got a what is it? We got something with Cranky Kong where he does like a karate shit. And then we got the races with the bears. And then what was the other one? Whatever they added to Swanky Kong and Funky Kong. And plus there's a whole new area. I thought it was in part 2. Damn, man, I gotta go back and play part 2 and get to the Lost World. We didn't finish the Lost World. I think, well, in the original, you're supposed to get like some type of ending. So, I don't know. Hold on, give me a second. Give me a second. It's that I'm doing something over here. But we're gonna check what's going on YouTube while we at it. Hold up. Because because I can't do two things at the same time, basically. So you gotta give me some time here. But I don't want to leave you guys up in the air. Tupac meets DMX. That's some fake shit. Everybody's mad at the AI for making famous people. AI. They don't like those. I saw one with Tupac's eyes, like he was looking backwards, and it looked weird as fuck. I was like, oh shit, that shit look crazy. Okay, there's nothing going on YouTube. Holy crap. Man. Yeah, there is nothing going on YouTube. And like I said, man, I got the Grand Theft Auto. Look, I'm gonna show you. I just can't play it because there's a lot of copyright music in there. Nah, I'm not even gonna do it. I'm not even gonna do it. This shit is fire though. Hold on, let me put down the music. This shit is fire though, how they added all these extra things into it. Oh, what level is this? And then some of the levels, I don't even recognize them no more. Well, oh yeah, did you notice when I was jumping in the water, the music kept changing? Did you notice that? That shit was funny as hell. I was like, what the fuck? The volume was down, but I could hear it. Look, let me test it. Look, hold on, let me see if there's anything here. Okay. So, oh shit. So look, I'm gonna jump in the water and watch the music change. Look. Oh wait. Oh shit. There's a fucking piranha in there. Hold on. But did you hear the music change for like a second? That's fire. I don't think they ever did that in the original. I doubt it. For Super Nintendo. But that's fire when the water changes. I mean, when the music changes. And there's a piranha in there too. Oh shit. Hold on, I forgot how to do this. Oh, there you go. Okay, how the fuck? Okay, it's not letting me, but I'm supposed to be able to get the water, but it's not working. There you go, you see? There you go. I got it. Alright. Damn it. See how the music changed? Oh shit, you can't hear it, right? My bad. The music changed. My bad. forgot to save. But yeah, I think I need a code, man. This fucking level is not working. It's like not hitting. No, how do I explain it? I'm passing right by it, the fuel, but it's not like picking it up. And again, those are the limitations of the thing that I'm using that can't be said, because I don't know a lot of stuff. Let's put fuel, see what pops up here. Oh, did I spell it right? No, I didn't. And I still spelled it wrong, but there's no code for it anyways. And this thing is not even charging. What the hell, man? But damn, access all areas, challenges, music menu, partner, complete funky missions, have all bananas, bonus coins, have all cogs, come letters. Max bananas. Yep, there's no code for the fuel. So let me try the other guy, Almers. Damn, now we cooked. We are definitely cooked right now. Oh, was it the other one? Hold on. I'm not sure if this is for the Gameboy. Okay, yeah, it looks like it. Okay, so let's go with one of these. Or both of these, actually. Let's see. There's only 2, 3, 4, 5 codes here. Let's try this one. Yeah, he doesn't have none either. These are the same codes from the other shit. Damn. I doubt the European codes will work for the American game. Move Dixie, come left or right, come. Are you kidding me, for real? Yep, there is no code for the fuel. So, we're just gonna get back to that level some other time. Oh my goodness. out of here, guys. That's enough of this shit. I just got tired of it. What the fuck is all this? Freaking Donkey Kong. Hold on, I need that song. What was the name of that song? Mechanos is the name of the map. But what's the name of the song? The original. Let me see. Donkey Kong. Shit, this thing almost fell. Yeah, the battery's not charging either. It's that this thing, it's not doing. I bought it so that it could charge while I'm playing the game, and it doesn't do what it's supposed to. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And I don't know where to find a real version. So SNES, DKC3, and Mechanos. Or should I just put OST? Let me see what pops up. Nah, that's not it, is it? That song is from Donkey Kong 1. Hold on, let me find it to make sure. Oh, Fear Factory. Oh no, it's not the one. Oh, so that is it. So that's the original. Isn't that the song that I got? Mistake. Alright. So I already got it technically. Look, this is what it sounds like. Same guy? The same guy from last
time. Greetings and welcome back, gentlemen and ladiesmen, to Donkey Kong Country Remake or Rebreak. I'm X Paradigm Gamer, and today we'll be looking at the third and final installment in the original trilogy, Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. I apologize that this review took so long to come out, and I'd like to thank you all for your patience and understanding. Without further hesitation, let's get this show on the road. With 2 best-selling games under their belt and a legacy of critical acclaim, Rare Nintendo's Donkey Kong Country series was clearly a success, so it wasn't too surprising that the series received a 3rd game in November of 1996. From what I understand, this game was developed by a different team than the one behind DKC 1 and 2, who are now working on what would eventually become Banjo-Kazooie. While Donkey Kong Country 3 still did fairly impressive in terms of sales, its degree of financial success was no doubt affected by the release of the Nintendo 64 that same year. While DKC 3 was well received, many critics and fans didn't seem to enjoy it as much as the previous games. Donkey Kong Country 3 is definitely the most divisive game in the original trilogy. Some people, many of whom have commented on my previous reviews, argue that the game is the best in the original trilogy. Others, with equal conviction, argue that the game is the worst in the original trilogy. Still more people rate the game decisively in between the first and second. So where do I stand? Let's find out. As with Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble also saw a portable reincarnation 9 some years after the original on the Game Boy Advance. As with the previous remakes, reception has been mostly in favor of the SNES original, though this time around there is a crowd who prefers the remake for reasons I'll bring up in this review. As always, we'll be giving the SNES and GBA versions an in-depth comparison to see how good of a game DKC3 is on its own, and how well the remake recreates, builds upon, and fixes the problems of the original. This is Donkey Kong Country 3 Remake or Rebreak. Let's begin with the plot. Unlike the previous two games on SNES, which at least offered quasi-cutscenes to give you an inkling of the plot, DKC 3 can't be ours. The game just starts. Sure, you'll meet Wrinkly Kong and Funky Kong within seconds of booting a save file, but they don't give you any sort of exposition at all. But EXO, surely the GBA version introduces an introductory cutscene to provide some background information? Nope. The GBA version is no different from the original at all, besides refitting Wrinkly's save cave into the banana bird worshipping Wrinkly's refuge. And that's really disappointing, because out of all the games in the original trilogy, DKC 3 needed an introductory cutscene the most. We're going old school today, folks, we're looking at the manual. After defeating Captain K. Rool and sinking Crocodile Isle to the bottom of the ocean, the Kongs return to DK Island for some much needed R&R. One day, DK and Diddy decide to take a day trip to some nearby islands, a Canada-like archipelago known as the Northern Hemisphere, leaving Dixie behind to man the fort. But after 2 restless nights without the return of her friends, Dixie begins to suspect that her fellow Kongs have run into some trouble. Concerned, Dixie sets off to the Northern Hemisphere and encounters Wrinkly Kong, who has retired from Kong College to enjoy her final years in paradise. She informs Dixie that DK and Diddy did pass by, but this was a while ago. Wrinkly convinces Dixie Kong to pay Funky a visit, and also requests that she keeps her eyes peeled for the legendary banana birds, creepy looking motherfuckers with shit your pants scary eyes. Dixie approaches Funky for help, but he's unfortunately clueless as to the boy's whereabouts. Regardless, he offers his boat rental services as a means of navigating the Northern Hemisphere, and convinces Dixie to team up with her muscle-bound infant cousin, the Southern Lowland gorilla Kitty Kong. Thus, Dixie and Kitty set off for the islands on board one of Funky's boats, blissfully unaware that the new Kremlin commander, the mysterious Chaos, has invaded the islands with his choleric company of Kremlin commandos. So do you see why an intro cutscene might have been kind of helpful? Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is by no means a story-driven game, but it would still be nice to know what the hell is going on without having to hunt down a manual online, you know? As for the story itself, I'm glad that my favorite Donkey Kong character gets a shot at the spotlight in her own game, but something about DKC 3's plot has never gelled with me. I don't know quite what. Regardless, DKC 3 isn't attempting to be story-driven to begin with, and the other two games weren't masterpieces of storytelling either, so I think I can overlook that. A lot of people seem to really hate Kitty Kong, the second player character in this game, and I can't say I understand why. Sure, his character design is pretty goofy and he's not as memorable as the other 3 Kongs, but I don't understand what he's done to become the Jar Jar Binks of the franchise. Let's get into dem aesthetics. In terms of art direction, the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy is probably the only one I know to give each game a distinct look and feel. The first game was Jungle Island themed and contained appropriate level themes to match. The second game was pirate themed and contained a huge variety of adventurous level themes and pirate flavored enemies. The third game is equally as distinct, though I couldn't tell you what theme they were going for here. If I had to guess, it seems to be a hodgepodge of an ocean theme, a classic horror theme, and a mad scientist theme. It's certainly not as focused or identifiable as the first 2 installments. On top of that, many of the enemies and level themes are recycled from the first 2 games. While the game certainly puts its own spin on things, enough to keep things from feeling uninspired or derivative, I can't help but find DKC 3 a smidge tired and confused in the art direction department. Concerning the actual graphics themselves, they're really well done. As before, the game treads a fine line between realistic and cartoony, with goofy and over the top as well as greatly detailed modeled and rendered sprites and backgrounds. The game is bright and colorful, and the dock levels also make use of a gorgeous 3D water effect. While the environments may be largely recycled from DKC 1, they look more than different enough and are all good on the eyes. Visually, I'd say that DKC 3 on SNES is largely on par with its predecessors. So how does the GBA version compare? Well, remember how in the previous review I called DKC 2 on GBA the best looking game on the system? Well, I think I kinda jumped the gun, because DKC 3 on GBA clearly looks better. While I prefer the second game's art direction for sure, DKC 3 on GBA looks best overall. As before, the sprites and backgrounds have been shrunk to accommodate the GBA's smaller screen size, but the colors and detail seem fully preserved. It seems to have suffered no downgrade in graphical quality from the SNES version. They look almost indistinguishable. It kinda makes me wonder why the first 2 games couldn't have been the same way, but I still opine that those games look good by GBA standards. DKC 3 on GBA looks just about as good as it did on SNES. How about the soundtrack? The general consensus seems to be that DKC 3's soundtrack isn't quite as good as the first and second games, though it certainly has its fans. David Wise returns to the composer's composer's chair from last time around, rejoined by Evelyn Novakovic of DKC1 fame. From what I understand, Evelyn Novakovic composed all the level themes and the boss themes, while David Wise composed everything else. The result is a soundtrack that sounds much more moody and atmospheric than the previous two, kinda like Novakovic's Voices of the Temple track from DKC1. So what do I think of it? While I do opine that it's underrated, I'd be lying if I said it was my favorite of the trilogy. There's a number of really good songs in here, like Nuts and Bolts, Rockface Rumble, and Big Boss Blues. But beyond a good 8 or so tracks, everything else is kind of forgettable. I also find that many of the songs are too low pitched and have too much bass. Some songs, like Pokey Pipe, seem to be almost exclusively bass. This depressing, atmospheric, and moody tone would be great for a Metroid game, but I think that a game where you play as a pair of apes bashing crocodiles and collecting bananas could use something a little more catchy and upbeat, don't you? I want to make it clear that I have nothing at all against Evelyn Novakovic. She's a fine composer and a great sound designer. I just don't think her style fits the Donkey Kong universe as well as Wise's more balanced approach, and I opine that DKC3 on SNES is ultimately worse off for it. A good soundtrack, certainly, but far from the best. So how about the GBA version? While the first two remakes are often criticized for butchering the SNES soundtracks, the remake of DKC3 is often criticized for not including the original soundtrack. From what I understand, the GBA speaker hardware can't handle low pitches very well. It'll actually burst into flames. And seeing as DKC3's soundtrack on SNES is almost exclusively low pitched, Rare commissioned David Wise to compose an all new soundtrack for the remake instead. And though I may be in the minority on this one, I think it's significantly better than the SNES soundtrack. Hell, it's almost as good as DKC2's. For the most part, it's a remix of Donkey Kong Country 1 soundtrack, but these aren't your average remixes. These tracks sound so distinct from the originals that they could easily pass as their own original tunes. If you listen really carefully to the country-inspired Rockface Rumble, for example, you'll just be able to make out Credit's concerto. As with DKC2, the GBA soundtrack is 100% AAA without so much as a mad track to its name. Whether it be Cascade Caper, Stilt Village, Jingle Bells, or the illustrious Water World, it's all catchy, it's all atmospheric, and it's all memorable. The instrument quality is also phenomenal, and as with the previous two remakes, the sound design has once again seen a noticeable improvement in my opinion. It's cartoony and over the top, just like a Donkey Kong game should be. I do have two minor complaints regarding the remake's sound. One, the game doesn't have a dedicated final boss theme. Two, the Donkey Kong Country death jingle is completely missing. May I ask why? Was there seriously not enough room on the cartridge to fit a 5-second death jingle? But frankly, these are pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. In terms of sound, I consider DKC3 GBA to be an improvement over the SNES original. And with that, it's time we got on to DAC gameplay. Dixie's journey through the Northern Cremisphere will take her through 8 worlds of about 4 or 5 levels, which once again sport their own unique and quirky names. Along the way, Dixie and Kitty will have to hop and bop their way through Kremlings and other baddies while throwing barrels and collecting the usual bananas, balloons, and Kong letters. The world map system has seen a revamp that addresses the potential travel and save issues from the previous two games. Unlike DKC 1 and 2, where you had to reach a specific point in a world to be able to save the game or travel to another world, DKC 3 allows you to leave a world at any time simply by walking out of it, and a Wrinkly's save cave location is available next to Funky's shop from the beginning of the game for you to save at any time. So if you didn't care for the save system in the previous two games, then your prayers have been answered. Nevertheless, the GBA version does allow you to save the game from the menu, and while that's by no means a major improvement, the extra convenience is nice. DKC 3 also sees some differences in terms of progression. You travel around the Northern Cremisphere in search of DK and Kitty, and defeating bosses will sometimes reward you with spare parts that Funky can use to make new boats at his shop. Using these new boats will allow you to access parts of the world map that you couldn't before and unlock new areas. In some instances, especially in the GBA version, you're actually allowed to choose between 2 or 3 worlds at a time and complete them in whatever order you wish. These are some interesting touches that make DKC 3 stand out, but I honestly never minded the more linear approach of past and future games. Regarding mechanics, the control is just as smooth and fun to play as before, and Dixie's helicopter spin continues to balance out the platforming for DKC noobs. In terms of control and mechanics, Kiddy Kong is largely the same as Donkey Kong from the first game, barring the hand slap mechanic. Unlike DK, however, Kiddy Kong can skip across water like a stone, which is needed to reach certain collectibles in the game. Besides that, however, it's pretty situational and doesn't even control very well. The team-up mechanic returns from the second game, but it's a little different depending on which character initiates it. When Kitty throws Dixie, the move is largely the same as in DKC 2. If Dixie throws Kitty, he can be used to break open secret passages. Like the water skip move, it's only really useful for finding a handful of secrets, but it at least controls better. As with the second game, Donkey Kong is once again not playable, and neither is his nephew Diddy. While many people seem to think that that's a huge drawback that totally ruins the game, I think it's just as much a nitpick here as it was in DKC 2. Kitty may not be as much fun to play as the previous Kongs, but he's far from a deal breaker. Also returning our animal buddies, who you can once again ride after finding in crates or transform into via a change barrel. Squawks, Squitter, and Unguard return from the previous game, controlling and playing exactly as they did before, but Rambi and Readily are nowhere to be seen. In their place is Ellie the Elephant, who is one of the highlights of DKC 3. She can use her trunk to grab barrels from a distance and to suck up water for use as a projectile attack, which makes for interesting level design. A purple Squawks also makes an appearance, and while he can't spit projectiles at enemies, he can pick up and throw barrels. Honestly, I don't find playing as the animal buddies to be as much fun as before. Animal buddies were one of the best parts of DKC 2. They were so much fun to play as, they controlled like a dream, and their levels perfectly complemented their abilities. The animal buddies certainly got their share of levels in DKC 3, and I do find that they were overall used better than in DKC 1, but most of the animal buddy centric levels seem to focus on Ellie, to the detriment of other great buddies like Squawks and Squitter. And for every great animal buddy level like Crackshot Croc or Bobbing Barrel Brawl, you get something like Floodlit Fish, which is just dull, or Stampede Sprint, which is the worst fucking level in a Donkey Kong game. What's here works, and there is plenty of enjoyment to be had, but I still think that the animal buddies are a step backward from Diddy's Conquest. The boss battles, in contrast, are all pretty solid. Each one of them sports a unique character design and strategy to defeat. Hell, I'm almost tempted to call them better than DKC 2's boss fights. In the battle against the overgrown Belcher the Barrel, you have to throw knickknacks into the boss's mouth to send it backwards into a pit. In the fight against Bleak the Snowman, you engage in a snowball fight to the death. The GBA version also sports an all-new boss battle against Croctopus, which is alright. Kerosene was a lot more interesting in my opinion. As with DKC 2, the bosses will change up their attack cycles as you progress through the fight, keeping things interesting and engaging. The boss battles are all excellent and one of the highlights of Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. Unfortunately, this is where the positives start to recede. Let's talk level design. In general, levels are largely structured as they were in previous games. You got a main linear pathway with the occasional branching pathways that brandish extra lives, DK coins, or bonus rooms. If you're like me and prefer more streamlined levels than what classic Sonic brings to the table, you'll be glad to know that DKC 3 keeps things as simple and straightforward as before. DKC 3 also contains its fair share of vertical platforming levels to spice things up. One of the things that made DKC 2 such a great experience for me was its sheer variety. Every level did something new, and it made the game's levels more interesting and memorable for it. DKC 3 attempts to follow this design philosophy, and it's a pretty committed attempt. Whether you're dodging projectiles from trigger-happy carbines, or killing sneaks on wheels to open doors, or even faking out a lightning storm, DKC 3 certainly tries its damnedest to deliver some engaging and original level design, and for the first 4 worlds or so, it largely succeeds. But the moment you reach K3 Razor Ridge and the GBA exclusive Pacifica, the game suffers a noticeable drop in quality. To be clear, the third tier levels aren't all bad. It's more like half and half. Some of them are actually really fun, while others range from uninteresting to frustrating to just annoying. Where do I begin? First of all, any level featuring this toboggan thing is an automatic fail. It's like the minecart and roller coaster levels from the first 2 games, only much worse. The camera is garbage, enemies fly on screen too fast, the toboggan moves too fast, the bonus rooms are annoying to get into and failing them requires you to kill yourself to try again, and in general they're just not that fun or interesting to play. And then there's Kong-fused cliffs. God, I hate this level. You spend the entire level climbing up this rope that's lit on fire and chasing you up an auto-scroll section. Naturally, the fire is forcing you up to the top of the screen, but a barrage of buzzes and copters will constantly be ambushing you from the top of the screen and forcing you down toward the fire. Between the awful camera and the claustrophobic level design, I always have a real bitch of a time at this stage. As you've no doubt noticed by now, I'm not a huge fan of the camera in this game. Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 had a handful of instances where it was annoying, but in Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, it's a consistent consistent problem. In the first 4 worlds of the game, it's mostly fine and I don't mind it, but once you reach the 3rd tier, it seems to get in the way all the time. Ropey Rumpus is a good example of what I mean. You have to climb along these rope sections, which are infested with buzzes that constantly ambush you from off screen. I know there are people who can't stand the camera in any of these games, but I think we can all agree that DKC3 is the biggest offender of the bunch. So you might be wondering, does the GBA remake improve upon any of these issues? Well, yes and no. Because of the smaller sprites and the wider aspect ratio, I feel that the GBA version is a smoother experience when it comes to seeing what's to your left and right. It makes playing levels like Tearaway Toboggan and Ropey Rumpus much more enjoyable. As far as seeing what's above or below you, however, it's just as terrible. In fact, Floodlit Fish actually got worse. I can't help on guard dodge all these lurchins in this super dark level full of downward shafts if I can't see them, game. Pan the goddamn camera! One of the highlights often brought up by those who prefer the GBA remake is the inclusion of an all-new world, Pacifica, in the upper left corner of the Northern Hemisphere. Inside are 6 brand new levels complete with new bonus rooms. And if the goal was to make levels that were just as mixed in quality as the original 3rd tier, then the level designers did a perfect job. I'm sorry folks, I want to love Pacifica. I really do. But aside from some interesting ideas and 3 good levels, the other 3 levels are some of the most insufferable in this entire game. Sunken Spruce has claustrophobic level design and terrible enemy placement, Surf's Up is another god-awful toboggan level, and Rip Curl Reef commits the cardinal sin of using a wind gimmick underwater. Seriously, this level is so much more annoying than Squawks' section in Animal Antics could ever be. I sincerely want to join the crowd that says that the inclusion of Pacifica is a solid plus for the GBA version, and while I do think that it certainly is a plus for the 3 good levels we did get, the other 3 terrible levels balance it out in the other direction. So why am I spending so much time talking about the level design in the 3rd tier? Because I don't think anybody else has ever really called attention to it. The first 4 worlds are pretty damn fun, and I actually think that the final required world in the game, Chaos Core, is pretty enjoyable as well. But then you get to K3, Razor Ridge, and Pacifica, and the game goes from solid fun to something more mixed in quality. A handful of levels does not a bad game make, but it's still a chunk of the game I dread revisiting. Even despite that handful of bad levels in the 3rd tier, I still think DKC3 is a solid and fun experience throughout if you're just looking to beat the game and not complete it. It's only if you choose to go for dem bonus rooms that the game transitions from mostly fun to kind of frustrating. Like with the previous game, DKC3 features 2 or 3 bonus rooms in every level. Entering one will take you to a minigame which rewards you with a golden bonus coin upon completion. Sometimes you're bashing baddies, other times you're collecting stars, occasionally you'll collect randomly appearing green bananas, and every other time you're simply trying to make it to the end. As with Diddy's Conquest, collecting all the bonus coins rewards you with access to new stages, a secret final boss fight, and the game's true ending. In general, I enjoy the inclusion of bonus rooms in DKC3 conceptually for the same reason as I did in the previous games. While the game's overall level design remains straightforward and linear throughout, the bonus rooms give you an incentive to go off the beaten path and explore every nook and cranny. And as far as the placement and level design surrounding the rooms themselves is concerned, I think Dixie Kong's Double Trouble is just as solid as its predecessor. Finding bonus rooms is generally rewarding, and their locations aren't as cryptic as DKC1 could often be. My main gripes concern the actual bonus room minigames themselves. To reiterate, I consider 102%ing DKC2 to be my preferred means of replaying that game. Finding bonus rooms was fun, and playing them was fun because they were simple and didn't interrupt the pace of the game. In Donkey Kong Country 3, it seems Rare decided to step up the difficulty of the rooms from the previous game, and I think the game is ultimately worse off for it. It seems like when compared to DKC2's bonus rooms, DKC3 sports more enemies, more stage hazards, more bottomless pits, stricter time limits, and other design choices that make it much harder to beat a bonus room when you first try and keep the flow going. To be clear, my issue is not necessarily that the rooms themselves are hard, and I can live with retrying a handful of bonus rooms because I'm not that picky. My problem is that it seems like almost every bonus room takes a few tries to complete, which absolutely kills the pace of what is otherwise a fast-moving and fun platforming game. Seriously, these things add a good extra 4 hours of playtime if you're not well practiced with them. I especially hate these green banana ones. It usually means jumping around an area with a bunch of instant fail hazards under a strict time limit, and the bonus room minigames only seem to get worse as the game enters the 3rd tier. Not only do you have to slog through the most annoying levels in the game, but you have to do it while constantly retrying bonus rooms. And that's just bonus rooms. You have to do much more if you want to fully 103% this title, returning from Diddy's Conquest or DK Hero coins, and you're required to collect them all to fully complete the game. This time around, DK coins are under the guard of Kremlings called coins with a K. They're heavily armored in front and on top, so you'll have to ricochet a steel barrel off off of a wall and hit them in the back to kill them. In general, I don't mind the introduction of coin enemies, and collecting DK coins is still a fun side quest. 90% of the time, solving the steel barrel puzzle and collecting the coin is a snap, but the 10% of the time it's not, it just becomes yet another pace breaker. That being said, fuck the coins and creepy caverns and crevice creepers. Seriously, what am I supposed to do here? On top of everything else, DKC3 sees the player going after the banana birds. There are 15 in the SNES version, and they are required to see the true ending of the game. Banana birds are collected in one of two ways. The first of these two is the Crystal Grottos, where you can play a game of Simon with 4 shining gems to release a banana bird from a crystal prison. And I can't be the only one who feels like these are a waste of time. The first few are short and relatively harmless, but as the game goes on, they get so long to the point where they just become an annoying chore. Does the game seriously expect me to memorize all of this? As the great philosopher Frank Langella once said in the hit 2012 indie movie Robot and Frank, fuck this shit. The second way of collecting banana birds is much more interesting. Living with Wrinkly and Funky in the Northern Cremisphere are a collection of shopkeepers and proprietors known as the Brothers Bear. Each one has their own unique design and personality, as well as some entertaining dialogue. By completing side quests with the brothers, you'll earn banana birds or gain access to crystal grottos you couldn't reach otherwise. While fetch quests feel kind of out of place in a Donkey Kong game, I actually find these kind of charming and fun. They're nothing amazing, but still enjoyable nonetheless. If you're playing the GBA version, then the Brothers Bear get a more realistic redesign for some reason. The remake also sports 5 new banana birds, along with the addition of Bachelor Bear. So how do you get these new banana birds? Well, keeping in line with the tradition established by the previous 2 remakes, DKC3 GBA introduces all new minigames, and they all kinda suck. Similar to the remake of DKC2, Funky Kong will give the player a series of 4 missions for a banana bird, in which the Kongs will take control of various watercraft and take on Kremlings, while the remix of RC Pro Am's theme plays in the background. And for some reason that I don't understand, the first mission is by far the hardest. This is due to a myriad of problems. For one thing, the boat doesn't control anything like it does in the overworld, which is guaranteed to throw you off, and the camera is zoomed in too close to the boat, which leads you to crash into shit by accident. Mix all of that with an unnecessarily strict time limit, and you're in for a real bitch of a time. The second mission is much easier and kind of fun. The third mission is also a lot more forgiving, but pretty uninteresting honestly, and the fourth mission is just annoying. Overall, I can't say I enjoy the Funky Boat minigame. All of the Wrinkly save locations have been replaced with dojos where you can train with Cranky Kong for a banana bird and extra goodies. All it really amounts to is moving the shield to deflect a bunch of mini bristles and protect Cranky. It's actually kind of fun, but unlike the Funky minigame, you only have to beat a single challenge to receive the banana bird, so it just feels like a wasted opportunity. Swanky Kong also makes an appearance in this game. In the SNES original, he opened a carnival minigame where you could compete with Cranky Kong for goodies. In the GBA remake, Swanky's Sideshow is replaced with a virtual reality minigame called Swanky's Dash. You take control of Dixie Kong in what are essentially Sonic 2 special stages. You walk down this corridor and collect stars while avoiding these ball spikes. All 7 worlds feature their own VR course, but you only have to clear a certain score cap in one of them to get the banana bird. And honestly, that's probably for the best. The control feels a little slippery, Dixie moves too fast, and this break move doesn't seem to do a damn thing. Regardless, this minigame is certainly tons more playable than the Funky Boat sequences, and it's possible to clear a score cap without too much frustration, so I'll say that Swanky's Dash passes. If you've seen my reviews of the previous 2 remakes, you might be wondering if this game contains the scrapbook mechanic from the previous remakes. Well, no. And that surprises me, seeing as the ending of the SNES original even features a scrapbook in it, so it's not like they didn't have the assets for it. And speaking of the SNES credits sequence, it's completely missing in this remake. And while we're talking about things that are strangely absent, what happened to the status screen from the previous remakes? The flags on the overworld are still good enough, but if Rare can include a status screen in the other remakes, then why couldn't they do that here? This game feels like it was rushed to meet a deadline or something. What we got is certainly polished and complete, but I feel like the other remakes got a fuller treatment. Regardless, that covers my thoughts on the gameplay, so let's move on to the spoiler section.
Spoiler alert!
Upon reaching the end of Mechanos, the Kongs encounter the Kremlin commander, a sinister automaton known as Chaos. After suffering a defeat at the hands of the Kongs, Chaos reluctantly exits, promising to defeat the Kongs should they ever get in his way again. After plying through the 3rd tier and entering the Kremlin headquarters in Chaos Core, Dixie and Kitty reach Chaos's castle fortress for the final battle. After booping Chaos twice in the noggin, the machine shuts off rather anticlimactically and gets winched up to the ceiling. Chaos's defeat prompts an enraged Baron K. Rulenstein to reveal himself as the mastermind behind the the events of the game. Chaos was supposedly part of some scheme for world domination, which Dixie and Kitty spoiled a la an episode of Scooby-Doo. With his robot destroyed, K. Rool decides to take matters into his own hands and defeat the Kongs on his own. And honestly, I think this is the best final boss battle in the original trilogy. The background is dark and tense, especially with the lightning striking in the background, and Big Boss Blues is a badass final boss theme. The fight itself is pretty unique as well. K. Rool will activate a series of traps that the Kongs will have to avoid while occasionally getting their hands on barrels that they can use to damage K. Rool's jetpack. It's interesting and genuinely challenging, and a perfect capstone to the trilogy. After Dixie and Kitty send K. Rool reeling, DK and Diddy tumble out of the destroyed Chaos. Yes, that's right folks, Chaos was a brainwashed Donkey and Diddy the whole time. After DK and Diddy congratulate the other Kongs for a job well done, the credits roll and the enemies appear for a traditional roll call. All's well that ends well. Or does it? If you're going for 103%, you'll still have to complete the Lost World, a volcano island known as Krematoa. A bear known as Boomer makes his home here, and for every 18 or so bonus coins, he'll use his explosive prowess to open the way to one of Krematoa's 5 levels. I've made it pretty clear that getting all the bonus rooms in this game is kind of a chore and destroys the pace of the game. So is it worth it? Well, no, because these levels aren't all that great. I mentioned earlier that Stampede Sprint, which is how Krematoa chooses to make its first impression, is the worst fucking level in a Donkey Kong game. You play as Ellie, who has been scared shitless by a pair of sneaks and won't stop running full speed ahead like a fucking train. A toxic combination of a god-awful camera, deplorable enemy placement, and Ellie's unnecessarily high speed pretty much means you're gonna waste a good 30 lives before you complete the stage. Oh, and let's not forget that Rare decided to put bonus rooms in the Lost World for some reason, and one of them requires you to bring Perry the Parakeet to the end of the stage while dodging buzzes that will kill him instantly. If you lose, which is pretty easy to do, you have to replay the entire stage with Perry in order to try again. What the hell were they thinking? And the rest of Krematoa isn't much better. Besides Crisscross Cliffs, which is probably the least offensive of the bunch, all the other levels range from annoying to tedious to just plain aggravating. In all honesty, none of these levels besides Stampede Sprint are terrible. They're decent enough stages, if not mildly annoying. But after spending hours upon hours slogging through bonus rooms in the 3rd tier, along with the worst level in the game, my patience and temper have worn thin and it becomes hard to enjoy these levels as a result. But hey, maybe that's just my experience. Luckily, the secret final boss is actually pretty damn good. After completing a level in Krematoa, you'll score a golden cog that fits on a device back at Boomer's shop. If you collect all 5 and fit them onto the machine, it'll activate and cause Krematoa to emerge from dormancy. The lava will cause K. Rool's secret submarine, the Nautilus, to emerge from the pool in the middle of the volcano. Dixie and Kitty enter, do battle with the Baron once again. And it's a pretty damn good boss fight if I do say so myself. The background looks amazing, and the fight is just as creative and interesting as the other K. Rool duel. Defeating him in the SNES version will score you the last DK coin in the game. After collecting all the DK coins, you can return to Funky's rentals and unlock the final vehicle in the game, the Funky Copter. This will allow you to fly over the world map and reach the game's final crystal grottos, which just feel tacked on at this point in the game. Would the game like it if I got it some coffee and walked its dog as well? Flying into the clouds in the upper corner will take you to the Mama Bird, the queen of the banana birds. She informs you that Baron K. Roolenstein has inflicted a terrible curse on her and her children, trapping her behind a barrier locked by the crystal key. She promises to help the Kongs get rid of K. Rool if she can locate all of her children and break the curse. The Kongs do just that and free Mama Bird from her prison. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the ending of the original trilogy. Yes, what you just saw is your reward for slogging through all the bonus rooms, and Krematoa, and finding all the banana birds. It's cute, I'll give it that, but it's kind of disappointing compared to DKC2's ending, isn't it? For whatever reason, folks, I bothered to 103% both the SNES and GBA versions of this game. I've now done it at least 4 times, and I've gotta say, it's really not worth it. It kills the pace of the game, and all the rewards besides the secret final boss range from frustrating to disappointing. So, remake or re-break? What's the verdict? Out of all the DKC remakes I've reviewed so far, DKC 3 GBA definitely has me the most torn. In terms of graphics, control, and simply recreating the experience for a handheld, it's pretty damn solid. The new soundtrack is also a gigantic plus in my book. While Pacifica is a mixed bag for me overall, I do at least enjoy the levels that are good. But then there's the minigames, which are passable at best. The game's also noticeably missing some things from the original and the other remakes. Because of all that, I really don't know what to make of this game. Do I call it a replace for improving the sound and adding new content? Do I call it a remap for not including a bunch of things that really should have been there? I guess ultimately I find myself somewhere in between. Remake. This is a good remake where it counts, and it at least tries to add some worthwhile things to the mix. If the game had included all the missing features, and perhaps made the minigames a little more enjoyable, then I wouldn't hesitate to call this game a replace. Regardless, I'm willing to accept the viewpoints of those who feel it's a remat or a replace. But how do I feel about DKC 3 as a game on its own? Again, I have a lot of mixed feelings. So much so that I actually played through the SNES version twice, once going for 103% and a second time just playing the game like normal. And you know what? When you're just playing through all the levels and not bothering with the side quests, this game is pretty damn fun. Sure, the third tier does cause the game to lower in quality towards the midpoint, but even that doesn't stop me from enjoying the game as a whole. The graphics are great, the bosses are excellent, the overall level design is strong, there's plenty of variety, and while the SNES soundtrack isn't my favorite in the world, it's still at least decent. Nevertheless, I can't bring myself to totally ignore the game's many flaws. The camera presents a frequent problem, the enemy placement can be really obnoxious, and the animal buddies feel downgraded. I also can't say I enjoy playing DKC 3 to full completion. The bonus rooms ruin the flow of the game and make the more frustrating levels in the game even more frustrating. Krematoa is also mildly annoying at its very best, and in the end your only real reward for 103%ing this game is a secret ending that really doesn't cap off the trilogy all that well. While my first experience with the Donkey Kong Country series was the first game on GBA, it was with Donkey Kong Country 3 on GBA where I really fell in love with this series. It is because of this game that I'm as big of a Donkey Kong fan as I am today. And I had every intention coming into this review of explaining why I felt that Donkey Kong Country 3, especially on GBA, was this underrated gem that never quite got the credit it deserved. But sometimes giving a game you like some time and distance can allow you to notice some flaws that you couldn't see before. And I regret to say that Donkey Kong Country 3 is one of those cases for me. I really want to love this game, I really do, but I try to maintain some semblance of objectivity when reviewing games, and I can't bring myself to ignore this game's flaws just for the sake of writing the review I want to write. That being said, this game is far from terrible, and I might even say it's better than many people give it credit for. As I've said before, sometimes it's worth taking the bad with the good for the sake of enjoying a game that's worth enjoying, and DKC 3 is a game worth enjoying. I'm willing to put up with a handful of bad levels and a situationally bad camera for a game that's mostly good. Would I recommend this game? Well, if you enjoyed the first two, then I'd say yes. Just don't touch the bonus rooms and I think you'll have a decent time. If you didn't care for either of the first two games, then I don't think DKC 3 is going to do anything to change your mind. As before, the SNES version is available on Wii U Virtual Console, and the GBA version is relatively inexpensive on Amazon and eBay. I say that if you're interested, then go for it. And that pretty much wraps up my final thoughts on Donkey Kong Country 3 as a whole. I apologize that this review was so long, even by my standards, but that should tell you how torn I am on this game. At any rate, join me next time when I review the Donkey Kong Land trilogy for the Game Boy. It's just going to be one video, and I don't think there's any need to go into as much detail as I did for the SNES games. I'll also be offering my final thoughts on the original DKCs as a whole, so you can look forward to that as well. And I promise that this review won't take as long to come out. I'm aiming for 2 weeks or less. At any rate, I'm X Paradigm Gamer, and I hope you all enjoyed the review.
Yeah, my favorite was Donkey Kong Part 2. That was the best one, I think. But we've been here for like 3 hours. Yeah, I'm out of here. I'll be back with Part 2 of the gameplay for Donkey Kong Part 3.